Your support means everything to us." The warehouse was a tomb of silence. The only sound was the labored breathing of Jonathan Sterling, his life slipping through Isaac's hands. Blood soaked through his father's shirt, warm and unrelenting, pooling onto the cold concrete. He's alive, but for how long? Isaac's jaw clenched. Not like this. He can't die like this. Isaac held him close, his hands trembling as he pressed down on the wound, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, Dad," he pleaded, his voice hoarse, thick with fear. "Please, just hold on." Jonathan's fingers twitched, weakly clutching Isaac's sleeve. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, only a shallow, rasping breath. His skin was cold, his strength slipping away. The sirens outside grew louder, but to Isaac, they were nothing more than a distant hum. All he could see was the fading light in his father's eyes. A lump formed in his throat, his chest tightening. He couldn't lose him, not like this, so he did the only thing he could. He began to sing. His voice, hoarse but steady, wove through the emptiness of the warehouse, filling the air with an old lullaby, the same one Jonathan used to sing to him as a child.
Close your eyes, my little one. Feel the warmth of morning sun. Through the storms and through the rain, I will find you once again. 'Cause no matter where you go, my son, no matter how far you may run, this heart of mine will always know, this love will always bring you home.
His voice cracked with emotion, but he kept singing, his grip tightening on his father. Jonathan stirred, his lashes fluttered. His breathing slowed but became more deliberate, as if clinging to the sound of his son's voice. David watched. From across the room, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't the plan. Jonathan and Isaac should have been gone, erased. But now everything was spiraling out of control. The officers momentarily hesitated, their weapons still aimed, but something about the rawness of the moment gripped them. Even David, pinned beneath an officer's knee, stopped struggling. His wide, calculating eyes flickered toward Isaac, something unreadable flashing within them. A haunting silence fell over the warehouse, broken only by Isaac's voice and Jonathan's shallow breaths. David's mind raced. Now, this was his moment. As Isaac continued singing, completely focused on Jonathan, David's sharp eyes flicked toward a gas drum that had been leaking steadily, forming a thin, glistening puddle just a few feet away. A plan formed instantly. He forced a sudden, violent twist beneath the officer's grip, kicking his leg out and striking a loose metal crate. The impact sent the crate crashing into the leaking pipe nearby. The room erupted. A burst of flames ignited as the gas caught a lingering spark from the flickering overhead light. In an instant, thick black smoke exploded into the air, swallowing everything in its path. Shouts rang out. Officers coughed, their grips loosening as they struggled to regain control in the sudden chaos. David didn't hesitate. He launched forward, slipping free from the disoriented officer's hold. His eyes darted toward the back maintenance door, a rusted, forgotten exit that no one had been watching. By the time the smoke cleared and the officers regained control, David was gone. The crash jolted Isaac out of his daze. His song faltered. His head snapped up just as the warehouse doors burst open and police swarmed in, weapons drawn. Officers shouted commands, securing the scene, but David was nowhere to be found. "Damn it!" an officer cursed. "We need backup on all exits." "Where is he?" another barked, scanning the area. "We need to get him to a hospital. Now." Isaac barely registered the officers moving around him. All he knew was that he wasn't letting go of his dad. The ambulance tore through the city streets, sirens wailing. Inside, Isaac sat beside his father, gripping his limp hand as paramedics worked to stabilize him. The hospital doors flew open as they wheeled Jonathan inside. Isaac moved to follow, but a nurse stepped in his way. "Sir, you have to wait outside. We'll do everything we can." Isaac stood there, fists clenched, and all he could do was wait, helpless. A familiar voice broke through the tension. "Isaac!" He turned sharply and froze. "Lillian?" His mind struggled to catch up. She was in hospital scrubs, her dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, concern clear in her eyes. His breath stalled. It had been years. The last time he saw her, she had been patching up his bruised ribs after a street fight. Her touch gentle but her tone sharp. He had wanted to see her again, had thought about it more than he cared to admit. But life had dragged him into chaos, and now here she was. What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, unsteady. Whitman stepped forward. "She works here," he said simply. Isaac's brow furrowed. "Wait, you two know each other?" Lillian's lips parted slightly, as if realizing something. Then, after a brief pause, she nodded. "He's my father." Isaac's stomach tightened. Whitman's daughter. He let out a slow, disbelieving breath, shaking his head. Of course. But before he could process that, Whitman spoke again. "They're looking for David. He won't get far." Isaac clenched his jaw. "That's not good enough. We should have stopped him back there." Whitman placed a firm hand on Isaac's shoulder. "Right now, we need to focus on Jonathan. We'll deal with David when the time comes." Isaac exhaled sharply. "Then we better hope my father lives long enough for that." Lillian stepped forward, her voice softer than her father's, but carrying the same steady weight. "Isaac, you're running on nothing right now. You need to sit down, breathe." He hesitated, then sighed, running a hand down his face. She was right. He just hated the waiting. Lillian touched his arm lightly. "You're not alone in this." The words settled something inside him, something he hadn't even realized was fraying. He met her gaze, and for the first time in hours nodded. David was on the run. His pulse thundered in his ears as he weaved through the darkened alleys, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. His body ached from the struggle, adrenaline barely keeping him upright. He had escaped by the skin of his teeth, but he wasn't safe. Not yet. His mind raced, each step echoing against the cold pavement. He needed a plan, fast. Jonathan was still alive. Isaac wasn't going to stop. And Whitman, David's jaw tightened. That snake. The moment he had seen Whitman standing beside Isaac, he knew. The old lawyer had betrayed him. The man he once trusted had turned against him. Gritting his teeth, David yanked his phone from his pocket, fingers trembling as he dialed a familiar number. The line clicked. A low voice answered. "It's me," David said, his voice a harsh whisper. "I need an extraction. Now." A pause. Then hesitation. "That wasn't the plan, David." David exhaled sharply, his grip tightening around the device. "The plan changed," he snapped. "Get me out of here before it's too late." Silence stretched for a moment. Then finally, "Fine. Meet me at the docks in 2 hours." The call ended. David sucked in a shaky breath, shoving the phone back into his pocket. His time was running out. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, the rhythmic beeping of machines the only sound cutting through the heavy silence. Isaac sat motionless in the hospital waiting area, his hands clasped together, his elbows resting on his knees. The weight of exhaustion bore down on him, but he refused to leave. His father was alive. Barely. His mind churned with everything that had happened. Jonathan's sacrifice, David's escape, the look in his father's eyes before he lost consciousness. Isaac's jaw tightened. David was still out there, running free, and that was something he couldn't allow. The soft shuffle of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up as a nurse approached. "Mr. Sterling?" Isaac shot to his feet. "Yes." She hesitated, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Your father made it through surgery. He's stable, but he's not out of danger yet." Isaac exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Can I see him?" "For a few minutes." He's still unconscious. Nodding, he followed her down the hall, his steps quick but controlled. The moment he stepped into the hospital room, his breath hitched. Jonathan lay motionless, pale against the stark white sheets, wires and tubes connecting him to the machines keeping him alive. The man who had once stood untouchable, powerful, larger than life, now looked so fragile. Isaac slowly lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, reaching for Jonathan's hand. It was warm, but weak. He swallowed the lump in his throat. "You did it, old man," he whispered, forcing a smirk. "You're still here." Faint twitch. Isaac's breath caught. "Dad." Silence stretched between them, thick with uncertainty. Then Jonathan's fingers curled slightly around his. His eyelids fluttered. Isaac leaned in, hope surging through him. "Can you hear me?" A long pause. Then, in the faintest whisper, "Find him." Isaac stiffened, his pulse spiking. Jonathan's grip tightened for just a second. His voice, though weak, carried a quiet urgency. "Stop him before it's too late." Isaac swallowed hard, his own grip firming. He didn't need to ask who. David had escaped, but not for long. He turned toward the door, his expression steeled. He had stayed at his father's side long enough. Now it was time to finish this. But before he could move, a small tug on his sleeve stopped him. Isaac turned and blinked down at the tiny figure standing beside him. A little girl, no older than 7, stared up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Her hair was tied in tiny puffs, her grip firm around something in her small hand. "Mister," she said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you help me?" Isaac frowned slightly, his mind still caught between the weight of his father's words and the urgency to act. "Help you with what?" The little girl slowly opened her palm, revealing a single, worn-out coin, scratched and dull, yet she held it as if it were priceless. "The doctor said my daddy needs a new kidney to get better," she explained, her voice trembling. "I have this much. Is it enough to buy one?" Isaac's breath caught. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "My mommy and my twin sister, they didn't make it," she continued, her small voice carrying a grief far beyond her years. "It was an accident. Our car flipped over. They tried to help my daddy, but the doctor said, he needs a donor or he won't wake up." Isaac felt his chest constrict painfully. A father fighting for his life. A child left behind. The memories clawed at him. He had been that child once. Lost. Alone. Hoping for a miracle that never came. Isaac knelt down to her level, his voice soft. "Kid, it doesn't work like that. You can't buy an organ, especially not with just one coin." Her face fell, her tiny fingers curling around the coin protectively. "Then, how do I save him?" Isaac's eyes softened as he asked quietly, "What's your name?" "Hope," she whispered. Isaac hesitated, staring at the desperation in her eyes. The same desperation he once had. "Sometimes, you just have to pray," he murmured, "and wait for a miracle." The little girl bit her lip. Do miracles happen? Isaac thought about Jonathan lying in that hospital bed, barely hanging on. About how he had spent years believing his father was dead, only to be given a second chance. A slow nod. "Yeah, sometimes they do." The girl looked down at her coin once more, gripping it tightly. Then, with the smallest of smiles, she whispered, "Then I'll ask God for one." She took a step back, then another before turning away completely. Isaac watched as she clasped her hands together, closed her eyes, and whispered something too softly for him to hear. Prayer. And for the first time in a long time, Isaac felt something shift inside him. With a deep breath, he straightened and stepped into the room where his father lay. Jonathan Sterling looked weaker than Isaac had ever seen him. The once powerful man, a giant in his eyes, now seemed fragile under the harsh hospital lights. Tubes and machines kept him stable, his chest rising and falling with slow, labored breaths. Isaac hesitated before stepping closer, his fingers curling into fists. "Dad, I'm here. You need to wake up." Jonathan didn't move. He looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. Hours passed. The hospital smelled of antiseptic, the hum of machines filling the silence. Isaac sat in the waiting area. Someone sat beside him. Lillian. She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "You look like you need this." Isaac took it, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thanks." A pause. Then, "Last time I saw you here, you were bleeding and too stubborn to let anyone stitch you up." Isaac scoffed. "I don't like hospitals." Lillian arched a brow. Clearly, for a moment, they just sat there, the quiet settling between them. Then Isaac spoke. "I thought about calling you after that night." Lillian turned to him, surprised. "Why didn't you?" "I wasn't in the right place." His voice was low. "I had too much going on." Lillian studied him, then simply said, "You've always been carrying a fight, Isaac." His jaw tightened. "Some fights don't end." Her expression softened. "Maybe not, but you don't have to fight them alone." Isaac met her gaze. For so long he believed love, comfort, peace were things he could never have. But now, sitting here, beside her, he wondered, maybe he didn't have to do everything alone. Maybe he didn't want to. Moments later, as Isaac sat beside his father, a soft knock broke his thoughts. Isaac turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, the little girl from earlier stood in the doorway. Hope. She hesitated, clutching something in her small hands. When she stepped forward, the dim light from the hallway illuminated her face. Her wide, innocent eyes still filled with that unwavering determination. Isaac straightened. "Hey kid, you again." She gave a tiny nod and walked closer. "I did what you said," she whispered. "I prayed." Isaac's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what to say. He had told her to pray because it was the only comfort he could offer. But now, looking at her, he felt an unexpected weight settle in his gut. "Good," he said softly. "That's good." Hope fidgeted, then opened her palm. "I brought him something," she said, revealing a tiny, folded piece of paper. Isaac took it carefully, unfolding it. Inside was a crudely drawn picture. 2 stick figures holding hands, a little girl beside them. At the top, in shaky, uneven letters, it read, "For your daddy." So he knows he's not alone. A lump formed in Isaac's throat. He glanced at Jonathan, then back at Hope. "You drew this?" She nodded. "My daddy doesn't like to be alone either." Isaac swallowed hard, his fingers tightening slightly around the paper. "He's lucky to have you." Hope gave a small, shy smile. Then, after a brief pause, she whispered, "Is your daddy going to wake up?" Isaac's gaze flickered to Jonathan. He didn't have an answer, not one he wanted to say out loud. Hope watched him, then took a step closer to the bed. Carefully, she reached out and placed her small hand over Jonathan's. Isaac sat frozen, watching as she closed her eyes. "Dear God," she whispered, "please wake him up. He has to see the picture." Isaac felt something shift inside him, an ache he couldn't quite name. He had spent so much of his life believing in nothing but survival. No faith, no miracles, just logic and grit. But this little girl, this stranger, was standing here, believing with everything she had. His throat tightened. He cleared it before speaking. "Hope, your daddy, how is he?" She looked up at him, her small face shadowed with worry. "Still sleeping, but I think God is busy right now." Isaac huffed out a small, breathy chuckle. "Maybe." Hope nodded, as if she understood something he didn't. Then she squeezed Jonathan's hand once before stepping back. Isaac watched her, unable to look away. "Can I come again tomorrow?" she asked. Isaac hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, kid, you can." Hope beamed, turning to leave. But before she reached the door, she glanced over her shoulder. "If he wakes up," she said softly, "tell him not to be scared. Sometimes it takes a while for prayers to get answered." And with that, she was gone. Isaac let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His fingers brushed over the paper she had left behind. He didn't believe in miracles. But right now, sitting beside his father, he wanted to. The next day, Isaac returned to the hospital, his steps slower than usual. A small teddy bear rested in his grip, its soft fabric nearly crushed under the pressure of his fingers. Hope sat in the waiting area, her little legs swinging off the chair's edge. She didn't look up right away. Her fingers traced quiet circles against the armrest, her face too blank, too hollow for a child. Isaac hesitated before crouching beside her, holding out the bear. "I thought you could use a friend." Hope blinked, finally meeting his gaze. Slowly, she reached for the bear, her tiny fingers brushing over the fur. "Thank you." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Isaac sat beside her. "How's your dad?" She hugged the bear to her chest. "The doctor says he still needs a donor." She hesitated, her voice smaller than before. "I'm still praying." Isaac exhaled. He wasn't sure what to say. He had spent years believing prayers never worked. But hope? She still believed. He could see it in her eyes. "Good," he murmured. "Keep doing that." Before he could say anything more, a nurse appeared in the hallway. "Mr. Sterling?" Isaac shot to his feet. "Yes." She hesitated, then offered a small, knowing nod. "Your father is awake." Isaac didn't remember running down the hall, only the moment his hands gripped the doorframe. He barely breathed as he stepped into the room. For hours, he had sat here, watching his father's still body, dreading the sound of a flatline. And now, Jonathan's eyes were open, not fully, just barely, fluttering against the harsh fluorescent light. His face was pale, his body weak, but his gaze was alive. Isaac didn't move at first. He didn't trust what he was seeing. Then, in a voice rough with exhaustion, Jonathan rasped, "You stayed." A breath of relief escaped Isaac. He let out a small, shaky chuckle. "Of course I stayed. You think I'd let you get rid of me that easily?" Jonathan exhaled softly, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Hope, still clutching her teddy bear, peeked around Isaac's leg. Her wide eyes lit up. "Are you still praying for your daddy?" Isaac blinked, taken off guard by the question. He hesitated before giving a small nod. "Yeah, I guess I am." Hope stepped closer, her voice small but full of conviction. "If he doesn't wake up next time, will he sleep for 300 years? Isaac let out a breath of amusement, despite the ache in his chest. "I hope not." Hope nodded, satisfied with that answer. She hugged her bear tightly. "Maybe God will answer your prayer too." Isaac glanced down at her, his throat tightening. He wasn't sure what to say to that. Before he could speak, a weak, raspy voice broke through the silence. "Maybe he will." Isaac's head snapped toward the hospital bed. And for a moment, Isaac saw something soften in his father's eyes. Something rare. Days passed. Jonathan's strength wavered. The doctors did everything they could, but Isaac could see it. His father was growing tired. Then came the news. "The damage is irreversible," the doctor explained gently. "He's stable for now, but there isn't much time." Isaac barely heard the rest. He sat by the bedside, gripping Jonathan's hand. He didn't want to believe it. Jonathan opened his eyes, the exhaustion evident. "Don't make that face," he muttered. "I've made my peace." Isaac swallowed hard, his throat burning. "There's still time." Jonathan exhaled, gaze drifting toward the ceiling. "Not for me." Silence stretched between them. Then, after a moment, Jonathan turned his head slightly, his eyes sharp despite the weakness in his body. "Listen to me, Isaac," Jonathan rasped, his expression turning serious. "If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something." Isaac's heart pounded. "Don't talk like that. You're going to make it." Jonathan shook his head weakly. "Promise me, son." Isaac swallowed hard. "What is it?" Jonathan's fingers curled slightly around his. "If I don't wake up, I want you to give my kidney to that little girl's father." Isaac froze. "You can't." "I can." Jonathan's voice, though faint, was resolute. "And if I can't do it myself, then I need you to do it for me." Isaac clenched his jaw, his chest tightening. "Dad, promise me, Isaac." Jonathan's grip, though weak, was firm. Isaac shut his eyes for a long moment, then exhaled shakily. "I promise." Jonathan's body relaxed slightly, as if a weight had lifted. His breathing slowed. Isaac held onto his father's hand, refusing to let go. Jonathan's fingers trembling in Isaac's grasp. "Don't waste your second chance." Isaac shook his head, his throat burning. "I don't want a second chance without you in it." Jonathan's lips curled slightly, amusement flickering through his exhaustion. "You'll be fine." The machines continued their steady rhythm, but Isaac could feel it. His father was slipping away. Jonathan's fingers twitched one last time, a barely there squeeze. His lips moved, his final words barely audible. "You'll be fine, Johann." Then the beeping faltered. Isaac's heart stopped. The room blurred. The sound of rushing footsteps, frantic voices, alarms ringing. It all faded into a distant hum. Hands pulled him back. Doctors and nurses swarmed the bed. But deep down, Isaac already knew. Jonathan Sterling had drawn his last breath. On the day of the honor ceremony, Hope clutched Isaac's hand, her tiny fingers wrapped tightly around his. The hospital was silent, the air thick with unspoken grief and gratitude. Doctors, nurses, and patients alike stood in solemn silence. Even those who had never known Jonathan Sterling personally felt the weight of what was happening. Hope's father had been given a second chance, and Jonathan Sterling had made sure of it. Tears slipped down Hope's cheeks as she held her teddy bear tightly, whispering, "Thank you." Isaac exhaled, his jaw tightening as he fought to keep his emotions in check. A soft hush fell over the room as Isaac slowly stepped forward. His breath trembled. Then he began to sing. His voice was low, unsteady at first.
I found you just to lose you, held your hand and let it go. You were fading while I whispered all the words I thought you'd know. I never said I missed you in the ways I really meant. Now the silence takes your place, and I can't make sense of it. But I'll sing you the last song, even if my voice breaks, for the love that came too late, for the heart that still aches. I will carry your fire, though the nights feel so long. If this is goodbye, let me give you one more song. You sang to me when I was broken. Now it's my turn to be strong. You left your echo in my chest like a father-shaped song. And I'll play it when I falter, when the world feels too wide. 'Cause even gone, you're the reason I still stand with any pride. So I'll sing you the last song, even if it's not fair, even if I needed more time and you're no longer there. I will hold what you gave me, though you're not here to see. This song is my promise that your love still lives in me. So I don't know sad moments in the sun, but I can do walk and carry your name until my days are done. I'm singing the last song with your memory in my hands. Not goodbye, but a blessing.
Every word carried the weight of what was lost, and what had been found too late. By the time his voice faded, the room had changed. Not in appearance, but in atmosphere. Something had been released. grief, love, goodbye. Hope wiped her cheeks and clutched Isaac's hand tighter. Jonathan Sterling was gone. The city drowned in rain. Isaac stood at the edge of the cemetery, staring at the fresh grave. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, thunder cracking in the distance. Cold bit into his skin, but he didn't move. Not yet. The father he had barely gotten to know had left the world the same way he had lived, on his own terms. His final act had given Hope's father a second chance, but Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more. He should have saved him. A voice shattered the silence. "You finally buried the old man, huh?" Isaac stiffened. The voice came from the shadows beyond the graveyard fence. "David." Isaac turned slowly, locking eyes with the figure standing beneath a gnarled tree. David's coat was soaked from the rain, his sharp eyes burning with something unhinged. "I knew you'd come back," Isaac said, his voice calm. David stepped forward, boots crunching against wet leaves. "Did you? I thought you'd be too busy playing big brother to that orphan." His smirk was mocking. "Adopting strays now, huh? That's new." Isaac didn't react. He wouldn't let David set the pace. "I don't have time for your games." "Oh, but I have all the time in the world." David pulled a gun from his coat and aimed it at Isaac's chest. "This should have ended in that warehouse. But you just wouldn't die." Isaac exhaled slowly, his heart steady. "I guess I'm harder to kill than you thought." David tilted his head. "You don't look scared." "I'm not." David's smirk widened. "You should be." "Then, Isaac!" A desperate voice rang through the storm. David's eyes flickered toward the sound. Just for a second. But that second was all Isaac needed. He lunged. His hand knocked David's gun aside just as the shot went off. The bullet flew wild, missing by inches. Isaac tackled David to the ground, both men hitting the mud with a sickening thud. Isaac wasted no time. He drove his fist into David's jaw, rage surging through him with every punch. David struggled beneath him, snarling. He reached for the fallen gun, fingers stretching, but a small foot stomped down on his hand. David cried out, looking up in shock. Hope stood over him, her little face scrunched with anger, tears mixing with the rain. "You hurt his daddy," she whispered, "and now he's gone." David's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. His free hand twitched, reaching for the weapon again. Isaac didn't give him the chance. He grabbed the gun, flipped it in his grip, and swung. The butt of the pistol cracked against David's skull. His body went limp. Isaac kicked the weapon far out of reach and pressed his foot against David's chest. "It's over." David coughed, blood trickling from his mouth. Isaac exhaled. He could end this. He should. Then small hands tugged at his sleeve. Isaac looked down. "Hope." She shook her head, fingers clinging to his arm. "Don't." Isaac's grip tightened around the gun. Hope whispered, "If you do it, you'll be like him." The weight of it all, the rage, the grief, the years of chasing ghosts, threatened to consume him. Then slowly he lowered the gun. David coughed out a bitter laugh. "You're weak." Isaac ignored him. He turned to Hope, resting a hand on her head. "Give me the gun." She hesitated, then handed it over. Isaac exhaled, stepping back, but his foot remained firmly pressed against David's chest. Red and blue lights flooded the cemetery as police cars screeched to a stop. Officers stormed in, weapons raised, their voices sharp with commands. One officer stepped forward, his gaze locked onto the man pinned beneath Isaac. "David Sterling, you're under arrest." Only then did Isaac remove his foot, stepping back as two officers grabbed David by the arms and hauled him to his feet. His bloodied face remained unreadable as they cuffed his hands behind his back. David's gaze flickered to Isaac, something dark and unreadable lurking beneath the surface. But he said nothing. The officers led him away, his boots dragging against the wet ground. Isaac stood motionless, watching until David was shoved into the back of a police car. The door slammed shut, locking him away for good. And just like that, the storm finally passed. Hope clung to Isaac, shaking. Isaac knelt in front of her, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "Where did you learn to be so brave?" She hesitated. "My daddy always told me to stand up when someone gets hurt." Isaac nodded, exhaling slowly. "You did good, kid." Hope sniffled. "I just didn't want you to be sad anymore." Isaac stared at her, something tight twisting in his chest. He had lost a father, but maybe in some strange way he had gained something too. He reached out, pulling her into a warm hug. She didn't resist, and for the first time in a long time, Isaac Sterling felt at peace. 2 months later, David Sterling had finally faced justice. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. Multiple charges had sealed his fate. The judge had spared no mercy. David was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Isaac had been there in the courtroom, watching as David was led away in shackles. David had smirked one last time, but there was nothing behind it now, just the empty bravado of a man who had lost everything. Later that day, Isaac stood at Jonathan's grave, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, the carved letters on the tombstone still too fresh. Jonathan Sterling, a father, a fighter, a man who gave everything. Beside him, Hope carefully placed a small flower at the base, her tiny fingers brushing over the damp stone. "Do you think he's happy?" she asked softly. Isaac exhaled. "Yeah," he said, voice steadier than before. "I think he is." A familiar voice drifted through the quiet. "I got your message." Isaac turned, and a small smile tugged at his lips as Lillian approached. Her hair loosely tied back after her shift, but her eyes were warm, steady. She stopped beside him, and without hesitation, her hand slipped into his. Hope peered up at her, then at Isaac, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "Is she your girlfriend now?" Isaac chuckled, squeezing Lillian's hand gently. "Well, that depends." He glanced at Lillian, amusement flickering in his gaze. "Will you say yes?" Lillian let out a soft laugh. "Guess you'll have to find out." Hope giggled, clearly satisfied with the exchange. She skipped ahead, her laughter lightening the heavy air. Isaac turned back to the grave, his grip on Lillian's hand tightening slightly. "Dad, this is Lillian," he said, his voice softer now. "You would have liked her." Lillian squeezed his hand in return, saying nothing. But she didn't have to. For years, Isaac had believed love was something out of reach, something he wasn't meant to hold on to. But standing there, hand in hand with Lillian, watching Hope dance through the cemetery's fading shadows, he realized something. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. He let out a slow breath, giving the tombstone one last glance before turning away. Lillian fell in step beside him, her presence effortlessly familiar, solid. For the first time in a long time, Isaac walked forward, toward something new, something real. And this time, he wasn't walking alone. This is a special collaboration between African Tales by Kia and African Tales by Rosa. If you enjoyed this story, don't stop there. Like this video, subscribe, and join the conversation in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Your engagement helps this video reach more people, so turn on notifications to stay updated on more thrilling stories. Your support means everything. Share this video with your friends and family. Let's spread the story far and wide.
I found you just to lose you. Held your hand and let it go. You were fading while I whispered all the words I thought you know. I never said I missed you in the ways I really meant. Now the silence takes your place, and I can't make sense of it. But I'll sing you the last song, even if my voice breaks, for the love that came too late, for the heart that still aches. I will carry your fire, though the nights feel so long. If this is goodbye, let me give you one more song. to me when I was broken. Now it's my turn to be strong. You left your echo in my chest like a father-shaped song. And I'll play it when I falter, when the world feels too wide. 'Cause even gone, you're the reason I still stand with any pride. So I'll sing you the last song, even if it's not fair, even if I needed more time and you're no longer there. I will hold what you gave me, though you're not here to see. This song is my promise that your love still lives in me. So I don't know sad moments in the sun, but I can do the walking, carry your name until my days are done. I'm singing the last song with your memory in my hands. Not goodbye, but a blessing as I learn how to stand. So sleep now, oh man, you were never wrong. And I'll keep singing until I bring your legacy. I wish I had more yesterdays, more moments in the sun, but I'll keep walking, carry your name until my days are done. So sleep now, oh man, you were never alone. And I'll keep singing until I bring your light.
Sangi हाल वे ठीक है करूँ वडेरे दडे हाल तगड़ी है घर वाले जानी बेरा सारे ठीक है तू ही कहता कर सांगे वीडियो अपने एडवांस शेड्यूल की थी है चलो एक रात घर गुजारी है कौन ही मसला
मेरे को नहीं इतना थे ना
वीडियो वाले हाल नहीं आ रहे दो वीडियो एक चैनल लेना 4 वीडियो तक बनाने में पोसा नहीं करें तू नहीं बना सकता एक रात मैं तो वैसे तेरे पर आदत पे हम भी वैसे ही बंदा तू तू बजाना पे हमना सफर देख सारा बाकी साकू के राज सारी जानते के राज सर वैसे चलो भाई घर से बंदा रहे अंदर सारा तक भी ऐसा है ना घर वाले बस यही सारा घर है तो पीछे घर है तो वतन वेव शो की वीडियो वायरल थी है वीडियो भी भाई वायरल થઈ है। अल्लाह खैर करे से। तो सबर आज नहीं आया हमने हासिल। ये हमारा ऑफिस है। मेरी वीडियो बन रही है क्योंकि मैंने स्टोरी वाली वीडियो पे लगाना है। अपने मोबाइल से वीडियो बना रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैंने वीडियो के एंड पे अपनी वीडियो लगानी है। और मैं ये सब कह रहा हूँ उनसे, शाहजहान इधर आ जाओ, आपको वीडियो में आ जाओ, आप भी इधर आ जाओ। इनसे कहो कि मेरे भाई को आप वायरल करें, उनकी वीडियो को वायरल करें। मैं हूँ ना आपका भाई।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस। अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस। आप मेरे भाई को वायरल कर देना और उसके सारे पैसे मुझे देना क्योंकि वो कहता है कि मुझे पैसे चाहिए, है ना? बोलो।
अब आज जवाब तो हो गया, आप शाहजहान को बोलने दो। उनको समझ नहीं आती, ये अफ्रीकन लोग देखते हैं ना, वो तो अंग्रेज हैं। इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलते।
हम मुसलमान हैं।
हम मुसलमान हैं, वो अंग्रेज हैं पागल। इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलना, बस आप आ जाओ। अब आपने जो बोलना। हाय फ्रेंड्स की बच्ची, ये देखो। हट जाओ खूबसूरत, आगे से हट जाओ। वे यार ही ना है। ये वीडियो शाहजहान की बन रही है। हाँ, आपको अंग्रेज लोग देखेंगे, आप बीच में ना आओ वीडियो में, ये अच्छी बात नहीं होती, ऐसा ना शाहजहान।
ये अंग्रेज हो गया, तुम जो समझेगी अंग्रेज क्यों पर काम।
हट जा।
अगली बार गुड खेलूंगा तुम्हारी गुड।
ओए ना करो फिर देख।
हाय गाइस, मैं हूँ अंग्रेज अबीरा।
अंग्रेज ये हमारी वीडियो बन रही है। ये मेरा शाहजहान छोटा भाई बैठा है मेरे साथ।
और ये मैं छोटी मैं हूँ।